1 month had passed since the day an old human walked away from a young queen, and the Crystal Palace was preparing for another treaty ceremony, but everything was different now. The throne room that had once been designed to make visitors feel small had been transformed to a towering platform that raised the throne above everyone else had been lowered to ground level, and the polished floor that created the illusion of an endless void had been covered with soft carpets in warm colors. Most importantly, the doors had been opened to allow common citizens to witness the signing. Queen Salith stood at the center of the room, no longer wearing her living crystal armor, but instead dressed in simple robes that any Velith might wear. Her crown remained on her head, but it seemed less like a weapon now and more like a responsibility. Ambassador Kang Dowan stood across from her, with Lieutenant Yoon Sora at his side and representatives from the Torvani, Mosswood, and Bright Path delegations arranged behind them. Advisor Torvith watched from nearby, his ancient face holding an expression that might have been pride. Citizens of the Velith Dominion, Salith began, her voice carrying clearly through the silent chamber. I have asked you here today to witness something that has never happened in our history. She paused and looked directly at Dowan. 1 month ago, I insulted an ambassador who came to us in peace, and I demanded submission from a people who offered partnership. A murmur rippled through the crowd of common Velith who had gathered to watch. I was young and afraid, Salith continued, and I believed that strength meant standing above others, that power meant forcing others to kneel. And I was wrong. She turned to address the full assembly. Ambassador, Dowan taught me something that my tutors and advisors, and even my own father, never could. For he taught me that true strength means being willing to walk away from what you want in order to protect what is right. Dowan inclined his head slightly, but did not speak. The treaty we signed today is not the document I tried to force upon humanity a month ago, Salith said. That document was an act of domination, designed to make us feel powerful while actually making us weaker. She held up a new crystal tablet etched with different words. This treaty establishes genuine partnership between the Velith Dominion and the United Human Colonies, with fair prices for our minerals, mutual defense agreements to protect both our peoples, cultural exchange programs to help us understand each other, and human educational missions to share technology and knowledge with our scientists. The Torvani ambassador leaned toward Sora. Did she just say sharing technology? He whispered in amazement. She did, Sora confirmed with a small smile. In exchange, Salith continued, humanity asks only that we treat them as equals, that we respect their customs as they respect ours, and that we work together to build a future that benefits all peoples of the galaxy. She looked at the gathered crowd. Some of you may think I am being weak by agreeing to these terms, that I am betraying our heritage of strength and dominance. But I ask you to consider something. Her voice softened. Our warehouses are full of minerals that no one will buy. Our workers have gone unpaid for weeks, and our children are growing up believing that the only way to succeed is to crush others beneath their feet. She shook her head. That is not strength, and that is not the Velith I want to lead. She turned to Dowan ambassador. I owe you an apology that goes beyond politics and treaties, for I called your species primitive, and I called you old and stupid, and I treated you with a contempt that you did not deserve. Her skin shifted through colors of regret and shame. I was wrong, and I am sorry. Dowan stepped forward and took her hands in his, a gesture that made several nobles gasp in surprise. Your Majesty, he said warmly, I have lived for 68 years, and I have met rulers from a dozen different species, but I have never met one with the courage to stand before their own people and admit they were wrong. He squeezed her hands gently. That is not weakness, and that is the greatest strength of all. Salith's eyes glistened with moisture. A reaction Dowan had learned was rare among Velith and only occurred during moments of intense emotion. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for not giving up on me." The treaty was signed with great ceremony. And when it was done, the common citizens who had been watching began to cheer. It started as a small sound, uncertain and hesitant, but it grew until it filled the crystal chamber with a roar of hope and celebration. The Tovani ambassador was weeping openly, his fur wet with tears of joy. Mosswood delegates' leaves had turned a bright and happy green. The Bright Path envoy's light was pulsing with excitement. Advisor Torvith, who had served 3 generations of Velith rulers and had seen empires rise and fall, allowed himself to smile for the first time in decades after the ceremony. As the crowds dispersed and the diplomats exchanged formal congratulations, Salith pulled Dowan aside for a private word. "I want you to stay," she said. "Not forever, but as a permanent advisor, to help me learn how to be the kind of ruler my people deserve." Dowan shook his head gently. "That is not my role, Your Majesty. For my job is to build bridges between worlds, not to govern them." Salith's face fell. "But I still have so much to learn." "Then let me offer you something better than my presence." Dowan said. He gestured to where Sora was standing with the other delegates. "Lieutenant Yoon Sora will serve as the new permanent ambassador to the Velith Dominion. And she is young and brilliant and idealistic in all the best ways." He smiled. "I think you will find that you have much in common, and much to teach each other." Salith looked at the young human woman, then back at Dowan. "You planned this from the beginning, did you not?" "I hoped for it," Dowan admitted, "but the outcome was always up to you." As the day ended and Dowan's shuttle prepared for departure, Salith came to the landing platform to see him off. As the sky was painted in shades of violet and gold, and the crystal spires of the palace caught the fading light like frozen flames. "May I ask you something, Ambassador?" "Of course, Your Majesty. Why did you walk away that first day?" she asked. "You could have argued with me or demanded better treatment or appealed to my advisors. But instead you simply left." Dowan considered the question for a moment before answering. "Because some lessons cannot be taught, Your Majesty, for they can only be learned." He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You had to see for yourself what your pride was costing you, and you had to choose for yourself to change. Because if I had forced you, or manipulated you, or convinced you with clever arguments, you would have resented it forever." He smiled. "But you did not need me to save you, for you only needed someone to believe that you were capable of saving yourself." Salith felt tears forming in her eyes again. "How did you know I would choose to change?" "I did not know," Dowan admitted. "I hoped, and I waited, and I kept the door open." He looked up at the Crystal Palace one last time. "That is all any of us can do for each other, really. And keep the door open and believe that the person on the other side will eventually walk through." His shuttle lifted off into the evening sky, and Salith watched until it disappeared among the stars. Then she turned to face her court, her people, and her future. She was still only 26 years old, but she was no longer a child, and across the galaxy, species who had dismissed humans as soft and weak and too forgiving began to understand a truth that the Velith had learned the hard way. Humanity's greatest weapon was never their ships or their soldiers or their technology. It was their absolute and unshakable belief that anyone, even a young queen who had insulted them, could become something better, and that belief, more than any fleet or army, would change the galaxy forever. Advisor Torvith came to see Dowan late in the night, wrapped in a plain cloak that hid his features and moving with a caution that spoke of secrets being kept from powerful people. They met in a small room at the back of the guest palace, far from windows and listening devices, with only a single dim lamp to illuminate their conversation. "You took a great risk, Ambassador," Torvith said as he lowered himself into a chair with the careful movements of the very old. "Walking away from a Velith monarch has started wars in the past." "I considered that possibility," Dowan admitted. "But I also considered What would happen if I stayed and accepted terms that would have turned humanity into servants of the Dominion? And you decided war was preferable to submission. No, Down said gently. I decided that neither war nor submission were the only options. For there is always a third path if both sides are willing to look for it. Torvith studied the human with his ancient 4 eyes, searching for deception and finding none. You are not what I expected, he admitted. When I heard that Earth was sending their oldest and most experienced diplomat, I assumed you would be cunning and manipulative, playing games within games to extract concessions from us. I am 68 years old. Dowan replied with a slight smile. I have played enough games in my life to know that the best outcomes come from honesty, not manipulation. Then tell me honestly, Ambassador, what would it take to repair the damage that has been done? Dowan leaned forward in his chair. I need to understand something first, he said. Do you believe Queen Salith is capable of change, or is she too far gone in her pride to see another way? Torvith was quiet for a long moment, his color-shifting skin settling into a deep blue that Dowan had learned indicated contemplation. She is young, he finally said, and youth means different things to different species. But for the Velith, it means passion without wisdom, strength without control, certainty without experience. He paused, but I have watched her grow since she was a child, and I have seen kindness in her, buried beneath the armor she built to survive her father's court. What kind of kindness? When she was 12, she discovered that the servants in the lower palace were being underfed to save money, Torvith said. She went to her father and demanded he fix it. And when he refused, she secretly diverted food from her own meals to them for 3 months until he finally relented. That is not the action of someone without a heart. No, Torvith agreed. But hearts can be buried so deeply that their owners forget they exist. Dowan nodded slowly. Then here is what I need, he said. I need the Queen to come to me. Not as a ruler summoning a subject, but as one person seeking understanding from another. She will never agree to that, Torvith said immediately. Her pride would not survive such a blow, especially with the nobles watching her every move. Then she must come without the nobles watching. Torvith's eyes widened slightly. You are asking the Queen of the Velith Dominion to sneak out of her own palace to meet a foreign diplomat in secret. I am asking a young woman who has made a mistake to take the first step toward fixing it. Dowan corrected. What happens after that depends on her. The old advisor sat in silence for several minutes, his mind clearly working through the possibilities and dangers. Finally, he spoke. I will try, he said, but I make no promises. For Salith is stubborn in ways that even I cannot predict. That is all I ask. Torvith rose to leave, but paused at the door. May I ask you something, Ambassador? Of course. Why do you care? You could simply wait for our economy to collapse, then return with offers that we would be forced to accept, and no one would blame you for taking advantage of our weakness after how we treated you. Dowan looked at the old Velith with an expression that held something like sadness, because I have seen what happens when powerful nations exploit weaker ones, he said. I have seen the resentment that grows, the hatred that festers, and the wars that eventually erupt when the exploited finally have nothing left to lose. He shook his head. Humanity has made those mistakes too, many times in our own history. And we are still paying the price for some of them. So this is guilt? No, Dowan said. This is wisdom, for I want to build something that will last. A partnership that my grandchildren and your grandchildren will still benefit from long after we are both gone. Torvith regarded him for a moment longer, then bowed his head in a gesture of respect that Dowan suspected he had not offered anyone in a very long time. I will speak to her tonight, he said. And then he was gone the next morning. Dowan walked through the market as he had every day since arriving on Velith Prime. But today he noticed something different. The common people, who had previously watched him with curiosity, were now watching him with hope. Word had spread that the human ambassador was refusing to leave, that he had not abandoned them even after being insulted by their queen, and that perhaps, just perhaps, things might change for the better. He stopped at the stall of the elderly merchant he had met on his first day, the one whose grandson worked on transport ships. "Good morning, grandmother," he said, and his careful Valither face brightened when she saw him. "Ambassador, I heard what happened in the throne room, and everyone is talking about how you walked away from the queen herself. I hope that has not caused problems for your people." "Problems?" She laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "You have given us something we have not had in generations, Ambassador, and that is hope." She pressed a small package into his hands. "Crystal cakes," she explained, "a traditional gift of gratitude. For whatever happens next, you have shown us that the universe is bigger than the Dominion, and that there are people out there who see us as partners rather than subjects." Gowan accepted the gift with genuine emotion. "Thank you, grandmother." "Thank you, kind human." He found a quiet bench near a fountain and was eating one of the crystal cakes, which tasted like honey and starlight, when a figure in a hooded cloak sat down beside him. "You know who I am," a young voice said from within the hood. Gowan did not turn to look. "I know who you are, Your Majesty." Queen Salith pulled back her hood just enough to reveal her face, her skin cycling through colors of uncertainty and fear and something that might have been hope. "Torvith said you would not speak to me unless I came. Do you like this?" she said, like a commoner sneaking through her own city. "I said you needed to come as a person, not a queen," Gowan corrected gently. "There is a difference." Salith was quiet for a moment, watching the fountain spray water into the air. "I do not know how to be a person anymore," she admitted. "I have been a princess and then a queen for so long that I am not sure there is anything else left." "There is always something else left," Gowan said. "It just takes time to find it again." He offered her one of the crystal cakes, and after a moment of hesitation, she took it. They sat together in silence, an old human and a young queen, eating crystal cakes and watching the water dance. And somewhere nearby, the old merchant watched them with tears in her ancient eyes, because for the first time in her long life, she believed that tomorrow might actually be better than today. 3 days passed, and Ambassador Kang Gowan did not return to the Crystal Palace. He did not send messages of apology or requests for another audience. He did not pace anxiously in the guest palace, waiting for the queen to summon him instead. He spent his mornings walking through the markets of the capital city and his afternoons meeting quietly with representatives from other species who had heard about what happened in the throne room. The story had spread like fire through dry grass. An elderly human had walked away from. Queen Salith had refused her treaty, ignored her commands, and left the throne room without permission while she screamed for the guards to stop him. No one had ever done such a thing in the history of the Velith Dominion inside the Crystal Palace. Queen Salith was learning what her pride had cost her. "What do you mean? They have not requested another meeting?" she demanded, pacing back and forth across her private chambers while Advisor Torvith watched from his seat by the window. "Exactly what I said, Your Majesty," Torvith replied in his ancient and creaking voice. "The human ambassador has made no attempt to contact us since leaving the throne room." "Then they are fools," Salith spat. "Do they not understand that we control the minerals their colonies need? Do they think they can simply ignore us?" Torvith was quiet for a moment before answering. "Perhaps, Your Majesty, we should discuss what the humans actually control." Salith stopped pacing and turned to face him with narrowed eyes. "What do you mean?" "I mean that while we have minerals to sell, we need buyers to purchase them," Torvith said carefully. "And the traditional buyers we have relied upon for generations are finding alternative sources in the Outer Rim territories. Then we will sell to others." "To whom, Your Majesty?" The Tovani Collective has limited funds since we raised their prices last year, and the Mosswood Alliance has begun rationing mineral usage to reduce their dependence on us, while the Bright Path Federation is negotiating with the Outer Rim suppliers as we speak. Salith's skin flickered with traces of yellow, a color that indicated anxiety. What about the new colonies? The expanding settlements in the frontier sectors? Those colonies are almost exclusively human, Torvid said, and humans control the fastest shipping routes to reach them, with freighters that can make the journey in half. The time our vessels require a navigation technology that allows them to traverse regions of space we cannot safely enter. He let that information settle before continuing. Without human trade ships carrying our minerals to human colonies, our exports will rot in warehouses, and our economy will collapse within 2 standard years. Salith sank into a chair, her crystal armor dimming as her confidence drained away. Why did no one tell me this before? Your father knew, Torvith said gently. He was preparing to negotiate a genuine partnership with humanity when he died. But those plans were lost in the transition of power. And you let me insult their ambassador without warning me? Torvith's ancient eyes held something that might have been regret. I advised caution. Your Majesty, but you were determined to prove your strength to the nobles who doubted you. And I failed to make you understand the consequences clearly enough. He paused. That failure is mine, and I accept responsibility for it. Salith stared at the floor for a long moment. What do the humans want? Truly want, not what we assumed they would accept. I do not know for certain, Torvith admitted, but I have observed Ambassador Dowan during his time here, and he does not behave like someone seeking to exploit us. For he walks through our markets and speaks with common people. He learns our language and customs, and he treats everyone he meets with the same respect regardless of their station. That means nothing, Salith said bitterly. It is just diplomacy. Perhaps, Torvith agreed. Or perhaps it is something humans understand that we have forgotten. Meanwhile, in a small cafe near the central market, Dowan sat across from 3 alien ambassadors who had sought him out in secret. The Torvani representative was a squat creature covered in soft brown fur, with large eyes that blinked nervously. As he spoke, the mosswood delegate resembled a walking plant, with leaves for hair and bark-like skin. And the Bright Path envoy was made of living light contained within a crystalline shell. You actually walked away from her, the Torvani ambassador said for the 3rd time, still sounding amazed. I've been doing business with the Velith for 60 years, and I have never seen anyone refuse them anything. There's a first time for everything, Dowan replied with a small smile. Ambassador Dowan, the Mosswood delegate said in a voice like rustling leaves. We have discussed your proposal among ourselves, and we are interested in pursuing trade relationships with humanity. Very interested, the Bright Path envoy added, their light pulsing warmly. We have been afraid of the Velith for too long, accepting their demands because we believed we had no choice. But you have shown us that choice is always possible. Dowan nodded slowly. Humanity believes in partnership, not domination, he said. We will offer you fair prices, mutual respect, and agreements that benefit all parties equally. And what do you ask in return? The Tovani ambassador asked cautiously. Only that you treat us the same way, Dowan replied. Fair prices, mutual respect, and agreements that benefit all parties equally. The 3 ambassadors exchanged glances, and Dowan could see hope beginning to replace the fear that had lived in their eyes for so long. Later that evening, Sora found Dowan in the garden of the guest palace, sitting on a bench and watching the alien stars wheel overhead. The Velith economy is already showing strain, she reported. Mining operations have slowed because workers are uncertain about the future, and 3 major export contracts have been canceled by buyers who heard about the failed negotiation. That was faster than I expected, Dowan admitted. What is the Queen doing? She has been sending messages every few hours, each one slightly less demanding than the last. And the most recent one almost sounded like a request rather than a command. Dowan was quiet for a moment. What does she say? She wants to meet again, but she cannot bring herself to actually ask, Sora said. Each message dances around the subject, hinting that perhaps there was a misunderstanding, suggesting that maybe communication broke down due to cultural differences. She is proud, Dowan observed, too proud to admit she was wrong, even when her world is crumbling around her. Can you blame her? She's 26 years old and trying to rule an empire that has existed for thousands of years while surrounded by nobles who think she is too young and advisors who remember when her grandfather sat on the throne. Dowan looked at his young lieutenant with new appreciation. You feel sympathy for her. I feel understanding, Sora corrected. I remember what it was like to be young and desperate to prove myself, to make mistakes because I was too afraid to admit I did not have all the answers. And what helped you learn? Sora smiled slightly. Someone older and wiser who did not give up on me, even when I probably deserved it. Dowan nodded and rose from the bench. Send a message to Advisor Torvith, he said. Tell him I am available for a private conversation whenever he wishes. Not the Queen? Not yet, Dowan replied. She is not ready to hear what I have to say. But Torvith might be able to prepare her. He looked up at the Crystal Palace gleaming on the hill above the city. The door must open from her side. Lieutenant, but we can make sure she knows it is unlocked. The throne room of the Crystal Palace was designed to make visitors feel small, massive. Pillars of living crystal stretched upward until they disappeared into shadows far above. And the floor was polished to such a perfect shine that it reflected everything like still water, creating the illusion that anyone who walked upon it was suspended over an endless void. Ambassador Kang Dowan entered with Lieutenant Sora at his side, their footsteps echoing through a silence that felt heavy with judgment. Hundreds of Velith nobles lined the walls, their bodies shifting through colors of purple and deep blue that Dowan had learned indicated suspicion and mild hostility. At the far end of the chamber, raised on a platform of pure white crystal that seemed to glow from within, sat Queen Salish. Was young, her features sharp and angular, even by Velith standards, and her skin rippled with patterns of silver and gold that marked her royal bloodline. She wore armor made of living crystal that moved with her like a second skin, and a crown of interlocked gems rested upon her head, each one containing a light that pulsed like a heartbeat. Behind her stood Advisor Torvith, ancient and withered, his skin so pale it was nearly translucent, his four eyes watching everything with the fire with the patience of someone who had seen empires rise and Dowan had read about Torvith in the briefing materials. The old advisor had served 3 generations of Velith rulers and was said to be the most politically shrewd mind in the Dominion if anyone truly understood the stakes of this negotiation. It would be him. The delegations from the other species had already been received, and Dowan could see their representatives standing in a designated area to the left of the throne, their postures hunched and submissive. The Torvani ambassador was still trembling slightly, and the Mosswood delegate had what appeared to be dirt stains on his ceremonial robes from where he had prostrated himself on the floor. The human delegation will approach, a herald announced in a booming voice that echoed off the crystal wall. Dowan walked forward at a measured pace, neither hurrying nor dragging his feet. Sora matched his stride exactly, her training evident in every controlled movement. They stopped at the appropriate distance from the throne, and Dowan offered a respectful bow, the same bow he would give to any head of state, no deeper and no shallower. The silence that followed stretched for several uncomfortable seconds. Queen Salith stared down at them with an expression that mixed curiosity with contempt. her four eyes narrowing slightly as she took in their simple uniforms and unhurried demeanor. "You do not kneel," she observed, her voice carrying easily through the chamber despite its conversational tone. "Human tradition does not include kneeling before foreign rulers." "Your Majesty," Down replied calmly, "we bow as a sign of respect, which I have offered." A murmur rippled through the assembled nobles, and Salith's skin flickered with traces of red, a color Down knew indicated anger. "Other species have adapted their traditions when entering our court," she said. The Tovani touched their foreheads to the floor, and the Mosswood representative crawled the final 10 steps on his hands and knees. "I cannot speak for other species." "Your Majesty, only for humanity," Down said pleasantly. "We mean no disrespect by maintaining our customs, just as we take no offense when others maintain theirs." Salith leaned forward on her throne, and the light within her crown pulsed faster. "You are bold for such a young species," she said, switching deliberately to broken and simplified human standard, as if speaking to a child. "Perhaps you no understand how things work in big galaxy, yes? Small peoples show respect to big peoples, or small peoples have problems." Dowan did not react to the insult of being addressed in baby talk. He simply waited until she had finished before responding in flawless Velith, a language he had spent 3 months mastering specifically for this mission. "I understand perfectly, Your Majesty, and I appreciate your patience in explaining galactic customs to us." The shock that rippled through the throne room was almost physical. Nobles gasped and whispered to each other, and even Torvith's ancient eyes widened slightly. No human had ever been known to speak Velith, a language considered too complex and musical for other species to master. Silith's skin flashed through several colors in rapid succession before settling on a deep purple that Down could not immediately read. "You speak our tongue," she said. "Reverting to Velith as well, I made the effort to learn, out of respect for your people and culture," Dowan replied. "Humanity believes that true communication requires meeting others halfway." For a moment, something flickered in the young queen's eyes, something that might have been impressed or perhaps simply reassessing, but then the nobles around her began to whisper, and Dowan saw her posture stiffen as she remembered that she had an audience to perform for. "Pretty tricks do not change reality," Salith declared loudly enough for all to hear. "Humanity is still the youngest species to achieve interstellar travel, still learning to walk while others have been running for millennia." She gestured to an aide, who brought forward a document etched on crystal. "This is the treaty we have prepared for your consideration," she continued. "It outlines the terms under which the Velith Dominion will graciously allow human colonies to purchase our minerals." Dowan accepted the document and scanned its contents while the throne room watched in silence. What he read was not a treaty of trade between equals. It was a declaration of vassalage. Human colonies would pay tribute to the Velith Dominion. Human ships would submit to Velith inspection at any time. Human citizens within Velith space would be subject to Velith law and punishment, and in exchange, the Velith would sell their minerals at prices 3 times higher than the current galactic standard. "This is quite thorough," Dowan said neutrally. "Thorough and fair," Salith agreed with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "I suggest your people accept quickly, before we reconsider our generosity. May I offer some thoughts on possible modifications?" The Queen's smile faded. "Modifications?" "Yes, Your Majesty," Dowan said respectfully. "While we appreciate the Dominion's willingness to engage with us, some of these terms may be difficult for our government to accept without adjustment." Salith laughed, and the sound was sharp and cold. "Difficult? You speak as if you have options, old human." She rose from her throne and descended the crystal steps until she stood just a few feet away from Dowan, close enough that he could see the light pulsing within her crown. let me make something clear to you, she said, her voice dropping to a hiss that only he and Sora could hear. Your species crawled from mud only moments ago in the span of galactic history, and you should be grateful we allow you to serve at all. She leaned even closer, her 4 eyes boring into his 2. Perhaps your age has made you forget your place, old creature. Or perhaps humans are simply too stupid to recognize when they are being given a gift. The throne room was silent, every noble straining to hear what was being said. Dallin looked at the young queen for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he carefully rolled up the crystal treaty document and held it out to her. I thank your majesty for her time and her honesty, he said, his voice calm and carrying just far enough for others to hear. I wish you a long and educational reign. He bowed once more with perfect courtesy, turned, and began walking toward the exit. Silith stood frozen in shock, her skin cycling through colors so rapidly that she seemed to strobe in the light of the crystal pillars. Stop, she commanded. Dallin did not stop. I order you to return. His footsteps continued their steady rhythm toward the distant doors. Guards, prevent them from leaving. The guards at the doors looked uncertain, their staffs half raised but unwilling to actually strike an ambassador without clear precedent. Dallin and Sora reached the doors and passed through them without resistance behind them. Queen Salith's voice rose to a shriek of frustrated rage that echoed off the crystal walls, but the doors closed, cutting off the sound. And Dallin walked on in silence. Sora waited until they were well clear of the palace before speaking. That was either the bravest thing I have ever seen, she said quietly, or the most foolish. Perhaps both, Dallin admitted. But some lessons cannot be taught with words. Lieutenant. He looked back at the crystal palace gleaming in the starlight. Now we wait and see if she is capable of learning. The shuttle descended through clouds of pale violet as Ambassador Kang Dallin watched the crystalline spires of Velith Prime rise from the earth like frozen lightning. Had seen many alien worlds in his 58 years of life, but this one carried a weight that the others did not. The Velith Dominion controlled minerals that half the galaxy needed, and humanity's expanding colonies were hungry for those resources. Ambassador, we are receiving landing coordinates now, Lieutenant Yoon Sora said from the pilot's seat, her voice calm but her eyes sharp with focus. Dallin nodded slowly and adjusted his simple gray diplomatic uniform. He had chosen to wear no medals, no ribbons, no signs of rank beyond the small Earth emblem on his collar. Some ambassadors liked to display their achievements like peacocks spreading their feathers. But Dallin had learned long ago that true authority needed no decoration. The shuttle touched down on a landing platform made entirely of living crystal that hummed with a faint musical tone. Under their weight, Velith guards stood in perfect formation, on either side of a long walkway, their bodies tall and slender, their skin shifting through shades of blue and silver like oil on water. Each guard held a ceremonial staff, topped with a glowing gem, and their 4 eyes tracked the humans with cold curiosity. They sent the 3rd guard to receive us, Sora observed quietly as they walked down the ramp together. That means we rank somewhere between minor trade delegations and traveling entertainers in their view. I noticed, Dallin replied, but his expression remained pleasant, and unbothered. A Velith official approached them with movements that seemed almost liquid, as if gravity affected his species differently, as if friendly, than it did humans. His robes were decorated with tiny crystals that caught the light and scattered rainbows across the platform. Ambassador Kang Dallin of Earth, the official said in accented but clear human standard. I am Secretary Havith, and I welcome you to Velith Prime on behalf of Her Eternal Majesty, Queen Salith, first of her name, Keeper of the Crystal Throne, Voice of the Dominion. The list of titles continued for nearly a full minute, and Dallin listened to each one with patient attention, while Sora maintained a neutral expression beside him when Havith finally finished. Dowan offered a respectful bow. "Please convey my gratitude to Her Majesty for receiving our delegation," he said warmly. "We look forward to discussions that will benefit both our peoples." Havith's 4 eyes blinked in sequence. A gesture Dowan had learned indicated mild surprise. Perhaps the official had expected the human to be impatient or irritated by the lengthy introduction instead. Dowan simply smiled and waited. "You will be escorted to the guest palace," Havith said after a moment of hesitation. "The formal reception will begin tomorrow at the hour of first crystal, and you will be presented to Her Majesty along with the other delegations." "Other delegations?" Sora asked. "Indeed," Havith replied with a tone that suggested he was sharing information of little importance. "Representatives from the Tovani Collective, the Mosswood Alliance, and the Bright Path Federation have also come to seek audience with the Queen." He paused and added, "You will be received last, of course, as protocol demands for the newest arrivals to the galactic community." Dowan felt Sora tense beside him, but he placed a gentle hand on her arm. "Of course," he said smoothly. "We are honored to be included at all." Havith seemed uncertain how to respond to such gracious acceptance of what was clearly meant as an insult. So he simply turned and gestured for them to follow. The guest palace was beautiful in a cold and distant way. Like a museum where visitors were tolerated but not truly welcome. Their rooms were large and filled with expensive furnishings, but the walls were bare of any personal touches, and the windows looked out onto a garden that no one was permitted to enter. "They are testing us," Sora said once they were alone, her voice tight with frustration, "making us wait, placing us last, treating us like children who wandered into a gathering of adults." "Yes," Dowan agreed as he settled into a chair that was slightly too tall for human comfort. "And they expect us to react with anger or desperation, to demand better treatment or to accept whatever scraps they offer just to prove ourselves worthy. Will we?" Dowan looked out the window at the untouchable garden below. "Tell me what you know about Queen Salith." Sora pulled up her data tablet and scrolled through the information they had gathered before departing Earth. She ascended to the throne 8 months ago, after her father, King Velorith, died suddenly from a rare illness. She read, "She is 26 years old by human standards, which makes her barely an adult in Velith culture, where individuals are not considered fully mature until at least 40. And how has her reign been received?" "Mixed reviews," Sora admitted. "The older nobility thinks she is too young and inexperienced. So she has been overcompensating by being extremely aggressive in her diplomatic dealings, demanding shows of submission from other species to prove her strength. A young ruler trying to earn respect through fear instead of wisdom," Dowan said thoughtfully. "It is an old story, one that humans know very well from our own history. The previous delegations that visited have all capitulated to her demands." Sora continued, "The Torvani agreed to pay 20% higher prices for mineral exports. The Mosswood Alliance surrendered 2 border stations, and the Bright Path Federation allowed Velith inspectors to oversee their shipping routes. And now she expects humans to bend as well. Can we afford not to?" Sora asked honestly. "Our colonies need those minerals, Ambassador, and the Velith are the primary source in this sector." Dowan was quiet for a long moment before he answered. "Walk with me through the market tomorrow," he said. "I want to see how the common people of this world live, not just the nobles in their crystal palaces. Is that wise?" "We might miss the reception. The reception does not begin until evening, and they have already made clear that we will be received last regardless of when we arrive." Dowan replied with a small smile. "Let the young queen wait and wonder why we are not anxiously pacing outside her throne room." The next day, Dowan and Sora walked through the markets of the capital city while the other delegations gathered nervously at the palace gates. The common Velith were different from the nobles. Dowan noticed immediately. They moved with less arrogance and more weariness. their color-shifting skin duller and less vibrant than the wealthy officials they had met. Shops that should have been busy stood half empty, and merchants called out desperately to the few customers who passed. Their economy is struggling, Sora observed quietly. The minerals they export have been finding competition from new sources in the Outer Rim, and their traditional trading partners are looking elsewhere, which means they need us more than they want to admit. Dowan said, humanity controls the fastest shipping routes to the colonies that actually want to buy what the Velith are selling. An old Velith merchant noticed them watching and approached with a hesitant but hopeful expression. Humans? She asked in broken standard. Real humans from Earth? Yes, grandmother, Dowan replied respectfully. Using the honorific he had learned was appropriate for Velith elders. We are visiting your beautiful world. The old merchant's eyes brightened, and she reached out to touch his hand with trembling fingers. My grandson works on a transport ship, she said. He tells me humans are kind, that they share food with workers and learn their names, that they do not strike or punish for small mistakes. We try to treat others as we wish to be treated, Dowan said simply. The merchant looked toward the distant palace with an expression that held both hope and fear. The young queen does not understand this yet, she whispered. She thinks strength means standing above others, but true strength is standing beside them. Dowan squeezed her hand gently. Perhaps she will learn, he said. The young often do, given time and the right teachers. As they walked back toward the palace for the evening reception, Sora glanced at the ambassador with new understanding. You are not just here to negotiate a treaty, are you? Dowan looked up at the crystal spires, gleaming in the fading light. I am here to show a young queen that there is another way to rule, he said, quietly. Whether she chooses to see it is up to her. The palace gates opened before them, and the test was about to begin.